Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Black Box Data from Heavy Trucks and Passenger Vehicles. In today's webinar, Mr. Whelan will discuss EDRs for heavy trucks, data collection and loss concerns, passenger vehicle EDRs, crash data and types of events, and case studies involving heavy truck and passenger vehicle EDR. To give you a little background about our presenter, James Whelan, he is a licensed professional engineer who specializes in trucking and vehicle accident reconstruction, mechanical systems analysis, and intellectual property. He has investigated hundreds of accidents involving heavy trucks and vehicles. Mr. Whelan has presented at national events for DRI, CLM, and numerous local events. He has provided expert testimony in numerous state and federal jurisdictions. Mr. Whelan has also worked on projects in North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. For those of our attendees who require a passcode, the word for today is accident. During the Q&A session, we will ask that you enter this passcode into the Q&A widget for CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must log on to your computer as yourself and stay for the full 60 minutes. You are also required to complete the survey at the end of the presentation. Tomorrow morning, we will send out an email with a link to the archive recording of the webinar. The slides can also be downloaded from the resource list to the left of your screen. Thank you all again for attending today, and James' presentation is now turned over to you.
Emily, thank you for the introduction. So we're covering today, black boxes used in heavy trucks and passenger vehicles, and how is that data used within an accident reconstruction. So the first thing is a term black box. Black box is a term thrown around by maybe people who wouldn't be experienced in the industry, but it's generally assumed to mean data which would have been recorded by an electronic device, which can give you some information about an accident. And so the official term that I use is going to be, it's called an event data recorder, and it's an EDR, event data recorder. And an event data recorder is defined as an electronic system that captures and records electronic information related to an event during vehicle operation. And so the first thing there is it's an electronic system. So when you say the term black box or event data recorder, you're actually talking about something that might be as simple as just like one module, or it could be as complex as 4 or more modules. And the purpose of these event data recorders is not for the sole purpose of recording accident information. Normally, the data is being recorded for other purposes, but we use that data, for an accident. And types of information you would expect to be recorded would be like criteria, wheel speed, the change in vehicle speed, or any sensor warnings. And what's important is it's only going to record data which is related to an event. And of course, I'm sure everyone here can be thinking about an event being an accident, and that's correct. But the car is looking at, or the heavy truck is looking at the event as something else, like maybe it's a sudden change in vehicle speed, or maybe it has to do with a sudden fault code. And so an event is a point in time in which one or more threshold criteria are met, causing the event data recorder to log data. And so for EDRs, we're first going to look at the heavy trucks. Later on in the presentation, we'll be taking a look at passenger vehicles. They're doing similar things, but they are two very different animals. Heavy truck EDRs are specific to the engine, not the truck. So if you're working on an accident case and you say, well, my accident is involving a dump truck, or it's involving a tow truck, or it's involving like a Peterbilt, that information alone is not going to let me know, or another accident reconstructionist know, if there's going to be any kind of accident data on that truck. Because for trucks, it's specific to the engine. And what's unique about a truck is when you go and you order a truck, you can specify the engine type, you can specify the types of brakes, you can specify the types of components. Or as opposed to if you go just buy, like a Ford Taurus, you might be able to choose the engine size, that's going to be pretty much about it. You're generally, confined to the certain engine manufacturer. Now, as well as the EDR being based on the type of engine, the option has to be turned on. So with heavy trucks, it's possible that either the capability of recording data is turned off, or it's possible that the threshold is set to a point where it won't even record data. So that's something which is unique for heavy trucks. And finally, if you have the right engine, and if it's able to record data, you have to cross a threshold for the event. And like, for instance, for vehicle or for heavy trucks traveling, a threshold would be the truck has to change speed between about 7 and 9 miles per hour in a second. So a good example would be, if a truck was traveling down the road at 60 miles an hour, it would have to drop its speed to about 53 to 51 miles per hour in a matter of a second to say, there's something going on, I'm going to record this data. Okay, so which heavy trucks are supported, or heavy truck engines? The first thing I'm going to just touch on is there's different types of data. You can get configuration data, you can get incident data, and you can get a snapshot. Now, configuration data is going to give you information such as, how was the module configured, how was like the ECM or the EDR configured on the truck. So that means, does the truck have a certain governor speed? Or, does the truck is looking for certain fault codes? So configuration data is not going to be typically what you would be looking for in an accident, but there is information there which may be helpful. The other bit of data we're looking at will be incident data. And of course, incident data, if anyone has been involved in a case where they've had a chance to look at like a nice report out of a truck ECM, that's where you're getting, the 1 minute of data. You can see the vehicle speed. You can see what the engine speed is. You can see if the guy had his foot on the brake or not. So that's incident data. And then finally, snapshot data normally is related to a fault code, and it just gives you a snapshot. And it might just be a few seconds of data. But if you have a snapshot that occurs during an accident, it might be useful maybe to give you like the vehicle speed. Now, when it comes to truck engines which are supported, the big ones are, Caterpillar, Cummins, Detroit Diesel, Mack, Mercedes-Benz, and Volvo. And you can see the emblems are here. So if you have a truck and it has one of these engines, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get some sort of incident data. And you can also see on the slide the dates when this information becomes available. So you can see Caterpillar starts in 1995, Cummins in 2002, Detroit Diesel will be 1998, the Mack is 1998, Mercedes-Benz is 2000, and you'll see Volvo, I have a big question mark next to it. And the reason that is Mack and Volvo now, at least on the heavy truck side, are one company. And it used to be two separate companies. And of course, you can see Mack incident data was available since 1998. Volvo and Mack came together within the last maybe 8 years, 7 years, and the process of getting incident data out of Volvo engines has now kind of fallen over to Mack and to their vendors. And so there's now a possibility that you can get Volvo data after an accident. Of the cases that I've ran, every now and then we do send the Volvo modules in, and I still haven't gotten one with accident data yet, but that doesn't mean that maybe someone else has. All right. And I was kind of discussing the boxes. So, for instance, Caterpillar, as of right now, it's still just one module, which is going to be on the side of the engine. Cummins is still one module. Detroit Diesel, depending on the year, it can be between 1 and 4, or maybe possibly more by now. Mack is going to be between 2 and 3 modules. Mercedes-Benz is between 1 and 2, and Volvo can be between 2 or more modules. All right. So the heavy truck EDR. So remember, the EDR is a big, broad term which is used to apply both to heavy trucks and passenger vehicles. And so the subset of EDR is different modules. And so some people who've been involved in accidents, I'm sure would have heard a few of these. You can have the ECM, the electronic control module, the ECU, the electronic control unit, the MCM, the motor control module, and really all those are three different names, which for each system the name is significant, but generally they're talking about the module on the side of the engine. You can also have what's called the VECU, the Vehicle Electronic Control Unit, and the EECU, the Engine Electronic Control Unit. Those are names shared with Detroit Diesel, with Mercedes, and Mack, and those are going to be modules not in the engine, but they'll be within the cab. The instrument cluster, really important for Mack and Volvo. So another module you have to keep if there's involved in an accident. The CPC is the Common Powertrain Control Module. This is a term used by Detroit Diesel. And then ACM is the After Treatment Control Module, which is, as far as I know right now, a module only being used by Detroit Diesel, which does contain some incident data. And this presentation for heavy trucks is really going to focus on this list that I've just described. There are other electronic modules on the truck that are not going to go into great depth within this presentation, but I'll mention them. ABS controllers. So heavy trucks today do have ABS systems, and the ABS controllers are recording fault data and snapshot data. So you are able to do downloads from the ABS controllers. Bendix and Meritor, they each provide their own software. You can use the standard hardware to hook up to an EDR, and you can get data. VORAD. VORAD is a product which was used, I can't tell you when it started, when it first came out, but it was used to help truck drivers determine where is the black spots, or to help to see vehicles in the blind spots when they're driving down the road. And so a truck which was equipped with VORAD would have sensors on the vehicle sensors on the truck which could detect vehicles nearby. And they would record data, and you would be able to see what was the relative speed of nearby vehicles relative to the truck. And there was a time it was fairly easy to get that data. The VORAD they got bought by Eaton, and they've come up with some newer generations of software, and there is some data there, but it's not as detailed as it used to be. Telematics. Telematics is a product put out by Motorola, and you'll see this in a lot of trucking fleets. Telematics is, on the most basic level, it's going to have a GPS receiver, and it's going to pinpoint the position of the truck about every 15 minutes. But then as well as that, it's getting data from the ECM or the EDR on the truck, and it'll also upload that. So, and it's uploaded to a server. So if you ever come across a truck and it has a telematics system, it's quite possible that the accident data, almost immediately after the accident, assuming there wasn't a power loss, that was uploaded to a telematics system, and that's been preserved. So you can go there and you can get the vehicle speed, and you can get the, if the driver was in the clutch or if he was in the brake. And that's normally kind of, to get to that data, you normally would have to go through the risk manager at the trucking company. PeopleNet is very similar to telematics. Once again, at the most basic level, you're going to get the GPS location about every 15 minutes. At the higher end, what you'll see is you're able to get the data off of the ECM. And so what will happen is either you get a threshold event and it'll record it, or sometimes the driver has to put some kind of manual input, and it'll record that data saying there was an accident. And PeopleNet, I've been able actually to get that data directly by calling up PeopleNet and giving them trucking info without having to go through the safety manager. Data monitored by the event data recorder. These are things that you'll find if you get a report out of an EDR in a heavy truck. One is going to be the last stop record. What the last stop record is just how it sounds. It's recording the last time the truck stopped. So you'll see this on Detroit Diesel and Mack trucks. So if you ever have an accident where it has one of these engines, and the vehicle hasn't been moved since the accident, there's a really good chance that data was there. A hard brake record, this is where you have a heavy truck traveling down the road and it has to cross a threshold. So it means it has to decrease in speed between 7 to 9 miles per hour in a second. Wheel speed is just documenting the wheel speed. Clutch pedal, so you'll know if the truck driver is in a clutch or not. The service brake, was he applying the brake or not during the incident? It'll let you know what the engine RPM was, and we can use the engine RPM and the vehicle speed once we inspect the vehicle and get the gearbox and even know what kind of what gear the driver was in. It also gives you information on if cruise control is being used and an audit trail. So these different EDR modules in heavy trucks will document if someone's been in there changing parameter settings or possibly erasing data. It'll record the daily engine usage, so the Detroit diesel will give you a daily engine usage that you can then compare to the driver's logs. It'll give you fault codes. Engine parameters is going to be the configuration data, so you'll know if this truck has a governing speed or not. Critical event snapshot, this is normally related to a fault code. It'll just give you a snapshot of data. You have here was also a cruise governor and an accelerator governor. So a heavy truck, the governing speed of a heavy truck can actually be set to 2 different parameters. It can be one number under cruise control, and it can be another number when the cruise control is not being used and a truck driver is using the accelerator. But this can give you an idea of the maximum capable speed of a truck on a level surface. It'll give you the engine usage history, so you know how much time has been on the engine. You can also relate that to the actual vehicle usage as well, and it'll give you the maintenance history. Okay, so how do you get the data out of a heavy truck? Most times, because since the truck is pretty big, most accidents, not all, but in most accidents, the damage to the truck is pretty limited. Most times we're able to hook up to the EDR through what's called the Deutsch connector, which is in the cab. On buses, it can be behind the dash. You can see in this particular example, it's a Freightliner truck, and I'm hooking up to I believe it would have been either a Detroit diesel or a Cummins engine. And what you can see is this little blue box is what's called the NEXIC, which is the hardware that I would use to connect my computer to the EDR. And what you can see in this photograph is the NEXIC is plugged into the Deutsch connector, and then it's using USB cables plugged into the computer. And so every vehicle, let's say every heavy truck engine manufacturer has their own software. So like Detroit diesel, I use what's called the Detroit suite, which is going to let me use DDEC reports to get the accident data, and then another part of the suite to get the fault codes. Like for Cummins engines, it'll be Power Spec to get the accident data, and then Insights to get the configuration data. So you're able to use the same hardware but different softwares. And for this Caterpillar, you can use CAT-ET to get both, we'll say, incident data and also configuration data. Now, so one method is plugging in the cab via the Deutsch connector, or sometimes the truck engine or the truck is so damaged that you're not able to do this. So you're able to do what's called a bench download, and this is getting more and more difficult every year because the trucks are getting more and more complex with the Environmental Protection Agency, the regulations. So in this particular photograph, you're able to see a bench download completed of a Caterpillar ECM. And if you look, you'll see there's also a bunch of wires coming out of the ECM. And ECM is a yellow box on the table there. And one of the issues with doing a bench download is, or not in a truck, is that you're going to generate a bunch of fault codes. So we use these, we actually call them black boxes, but these boxes with resistors to mimic sensors to ideally get rid of most of those codes. Another option is if you're worried about throwing codes and you have the sister vehicle, what I've also done is remove the EDR from a damaged vehicle and put it in a sister vehicle and extract data that way as well. Now, another method for EDR data collection. So the heavy truck engines that I mentioned, myself as an engineer or accident reconstructionist, I'm able to go out and get incident data or accident data off of most of those engines. That does not hold true for Volvo and Mack. Volvo and Mack have their own process, and they're using two vendors, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. So whenever I have an accident involving a Volvo or a Mack, I have to remove the modules and send those modules to one of those two vendors. And so this is a case which I worked recently on where I've removed both the ECU, the VCU, and the instrument cluster, and those were being sent away to Mac to get the incident data. Okay, so typical data that you're going to see in an ECM, the first one here we'll see is the audit trail. So what you're able to see, this is out of a Detroit Diesel DDAC report. You can see circled in red. It says 4 extracted but not reset. So what that tells me is that by the time I did my download, there were 4 people. Actually, mine also would have been included. So there would have been 3 plus myself would have done a download of this engine, and none of us reset the data. And what's unique with Detroit Diesel is it's very easy to completely erase any incident data. So if you have someone who's not doesn't know what they're doing, there's a big risk of destroying the data and dealing with an exfoliation claim. Other useful data. So you can see here the first red line is for a Mack truck. It gives you the customer speed limit. So in this particular case, the truck speed limit is limited to 68 miles per hour. So that means, on a level road surface, once a truck gets to 68 miles per hour, the engine governor is going to limit the driver from applying any more power to the engine for the vehicle to go over that speed. However, if a truck was going downhill and it was able to go faster than 68 miles per hour without the use of the engine, that, of course, is still possible. And you see the table below, we have a Caterpillar engine, and it's got a vehicle speed limit of 127 miles per hour. Now, of course, it's not actually possible to go 127 miles per hour, so that wouldn't really happen with this particular truck. But what it lets you know is that the operator of that truck is going to be able to go as fast as the truck will allow them. So there is no limiting speed, and this information does become really helpful on incidents where you have an accident involving a closing speed. So if you have a passenger vehicle on the roadway or a truck on the roadway, and the lead truck is moving and the back truck is kind of catching up, and you want to get an idea of what are the possible speeds you could have impacted at, this information is very useful. This is just some fault codes. In this particular example, it's just showing a crankshaft position sensor. Some maybe the more useful ones that could be interesting to see if you had like an air warning, a low air pressure. That would give you an indication that the air pressure is not working or the air pressure is low in the truck, which would also mean that you're going to have an issue with the brakes. Also, a fault code you'll normally see will be a low coolant level, and that normally happens after the front end of a truck hits something. You break the radiator, all the coolant comes out, and so you're able to get some data recorded with that. All right. This is, you'll see now, this is on Detroit Diesel. You can get the daily engine usage, and it'll give you the information in 2-hour blocks. So it'll give you that information actually both in a tabular form and also in a graphical form. So what you can see here, and I've only given you a little screenshot out of it, but what you'll see is it breaks the day up. This is January 12th, and it's breaking the day up into 2-hour blocks. So you can see that from midnight to 2, the truck wasn't running, 2 to 4, the truck wasn't running, and we can actually skip all the way up to noon, to 12 o'clock in the day, and the truck was not running. And you can see here between 12 and 1400 hours, the truck was idling, and it's only for 3 minutes. And so if you look up at the table above and you look you can see there's going to be, 3 main columns, and there's going to be 4 subset in each subset of the main column. But you can see the truck was only idling for 3 minutes, and then, of course, from 1400 to 2000, the truck was off. And then from 20 to 22, you can see the truck was idling for 52 minutes. And, of course, from 22 to 24, it was idling for 101 minutes, and it was actually operating for 15 minutes. And now you can take this data and you can correlate it with the driver's logs on the actual that he records in this book. And you can see it here on the left side. That's an example of a driver's log that's written in as he's doing his trip. And, of course, I'm sure people here understand that sometimes the truck driver will keep 2 logs, or sometimes he's not always honest with what he was actually driving. So you're able to use this data and correlate to see, how long was he driving? Is he over his hours of service? Was he where he said he was? And so there's a couple of cases where this information has been very, very useful. This is actually like a 3-axis graph, and it gives you an idea of the engine speed and also the vehicle speed. And you can see here in this particular case, this truck spent a lot of time at idle, not going very fast, and it spent a lot of time going at about 50 miles an hour. Sometimes you can get a graph like this where you can tie the truck to the driver, and if you have that information, you might be able to pinpoint the drivers, or conclude that the driver spent a great deal of time maybe going 75 or 80 miles an hour. So there's a lot of information on here that you can use to kind of give an idea of the quality of the driver, if that driver can be tied to that truck. If you have multiple drivers in a truck, then it's difficult to do that. Highest speed. So you can also get an idea of the highest speed that a truck has ever reached. In this particular example, it's a Detroit diesel. At the time of my download, the highest speed the truck had ever been traveling was 69 miles per hour. And other examples of maximum speed, this is a Cummins engine. In this particular case, the maximum vehicle speed was 77 miles per hour. Caterpillar engine, the maximum vehicle speed was 85 miles per hour. Once again, something that gives you an idea of the pattern of how the truck was driven. Okay, and now here's the incident data. This is something that I'm sure most people on the call are really interested in, is what happened during my accident. And so what you see here is I have a couple screenshots from a DDEC report, which is in Detroit diesel. And what it will do is when you have this threshold, right, the threshold that has to get crossed, so in this particular case, it looks like we have a change in vehicle speed, it's going to record that data in a tabular form, but then it'll also plot it in a graphical form. And so here we have about 1 minute of data. And what you can see is the vehicle was traveling at approximately 57 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour. This is about a minute prior to the threshold. And as he's traveling along, the speed is fairly constant. And at the same time, while it's not being shown in this graph, you can see if the brake was on, you can see if he was on the clutch, you can see what position was the throttle, and was he using cruise control, and was there any diagnostic code in the trucks, or were there any warning lights saying there was an issue. And if you go back to the graph, you can see he's traveling along, and then all of a sudden the line begins to curve down, and there's a vertical red line. And that vertical red line is not added by me. This is what Detroit diesel would have added. And this is your threshold. So this tells us now that at this point the truck is deaccelerating at approximately between 7 and 9 miles per hour within a second. And then, of course, that data finishes to about maybe, I think it's 15 seconds past the incident. So with Detroit diesel, if you're working with a hard stop event, it's possible to get about a minute of data. So you'll know for a minute, what speed was the truck driver going. If you know his engine speed, you can also then calculate what gear he was in. If you've also inspected the truck and gotten the gearbox information, was he on the brake? Was he on the clutch? Was he on cruise control? And was his foot on the throttle? And were there any diagnostic codes? Okay. Cummins. Cummins provides similar information. They'll have up to 3 events. their data originally used to just be in tabular form, and I think with the most recent software update, they also offer in graphical. But you can see it's very similar. So you can see here on the left side, it's going to be time in seconds and minus 59, minus 58, minus 57. So it's counting down to the event. The vehicle speed you can see is the next column over, 42 to 43, 45. Engine speed, engine load. You can see in this particular case, the guy has a throttle all the way floored out, not on the brake, not on the clutch, the cruise control is not on, and the lamp status. This is also diagnostic, so what's our diagnostic code going on? And you can also see up at the top, it gives you the total ECM runtime and the occurrence distance. So we use that information to tie in a particular, sudden deacceleration event to the accident. All right, this is an example of the MAC data. MAC will give you data in both a tabular and also graphical form. And you can see when it's in a graphical form, it gives you a really good kind of bird's eye view of what's going on. On this particular chart, the black line is going to be the vehicle speed, and the blue line is going to be the accelerator. And there's a very hard black line on the bottom, and it's titled service brake. And that's going to be, once the service brake is applied. So what you can see here, and this is like a last stop event, is you can see the vehicle was traveling about 30 miles an hour. You can see that once the service brake was applied, the vehicle speed went down to 0. Service brake was released, and that blue line, that dotted blue line, is the accelerator. So you can see the accelerator was applied, the vehicle speed picked up, and of course it went back down to 0 again. But we know, with every 1 second interval, what that driver was doing. Okay, so we have a case study, and what is significant about this case study is that this data is used, it has to be used in conjunction with the actual accident. So right now I have a Cummins IFX engine, and and one thing is now, so I know it's a Cummins engine because when I open up the engine compartment, it's red, and you can see the big C, the big Cummins. Now, what's unique with Cummins is there's certain things you want to look at. One is you have the 3 sudden deceleration data reports, which we've already mentioned. The threshold is about 9 miles per hour per second, and it normally records data at 1 hertz. So 1 hertz means that it's going to record, 1 time a second. And there's also a known issue with Cummins engines with the data recording, in that sometimes where it looks like the data is actually recording at 5 hertz when it should be at 1 hertz. So actually you're getting 5 readings per second versus 1 reading per second. And so now I have a case here, and the purpose to go through is just to show like what can happen with one of these ECMs. So right now in this particular trip information, we see that the total trip distance is going to be 512,000 miles, and the total engine distance is 728,000 miles. So those are key numbers. So like the odometer on a truck says 369,000 miles. Now, the next slide is going to show the 3 events, and all I've done is I've just taken a snapshot. And if you look at the top 3, if you look at the slide, it just shows record 1, record 2, record 3. So this is the title of each different event, and you can see the occurrence distance is, for record 1 is about 505,000 miles. Record 2 is 511,000 miles, and record 3 is about 504,000 miles. And what the issue is here is I have a total odometer reading of about 700,000 miles, and of course everything is occurring about in the 500,000 mile range. And, I went back to my client. I'm like, I'm having a hard time understanding what's going on. Can we get the maintenance history on this truck? And so I'm going back to the previous slide here. And what you can see is there's what's called an engine distance offset of about 370,000 miles. So what had happened in this particular case was there was an engine failure at about, that mileage, about 216,000 miles. And so the mechanic had switched out. They put in a brand new engine, and they put the offset in. And so because of that, there was an offset between the odometer on the truck and the recorded events. So that was one issue that you kind of have to be aware of when looking at the ECM data, and you have to be able to account for was, the odometer being off. Now, the same ECM, there was another issue. So now we're looking at, once again, the 3 records, and what I've done is I've pasted the time intervals from -1 to 1 second for each of these 3 events. And you'll see the 3 circles on the left-hand side, and each of those circles is kind of just covering the event. And remember, I've already said an event for Cummins was you have to have a change in vehicle speed of 9 miles per hour over a 1 second period. If you look at the first event, you can see at -1 second, the vehicle is going 9 miles per hour. And then at 0 seconds, it's going 10 miles an hour. So this is actually an increase in speed. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you look at the second event, you can see at -1 second, it's going 6 miles an hour. And then at 0 seconds, it's going 6 miles an hour. So there's no change in speed. And at the third event, it's the same issue. At -1 second, you're going 7 miles an hour. And then at 0 seconds, it's going to be 7 miles an hour. And so what we have here is data that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you recall, I did kind of going into Cummins, I indicated there was an issue where the data may be recorded at 5 hertz versus 1 hertz. And that's exactly what had happened here. And it's obvious to when you look at the data to explain this. And so what you have to do is to take the data, adjust it for 5 hertz, so you end up only getting about 11.8 seconds. But what it gives you is you're able to see then from your -1 to 0 a change in speed between 17 and 6 miles per hour. And this data has been able to be plotted. So what I was able to tell in this particular case is I had a truck driver. He was going approximately, the engine speed is, the vehicle speed is going to be the blue line, going a little bit over 40 miles an hour. He was actually jackknifing going down a hill. But you can see as he was starting to go down the hill, he had applied his brake and his vehicle speed slowed down. And this is between about -9 and -7 seconds. He then released the brake. His vehicle speed began to increase. He then hit the clutch. He was doing some downshifting to get the vehicle to slow down. And then right from like -3 to 0 seconds, you can see there's a whole lot going on with the line. The long story short, that was his jackknifing event. But we were able to pinpoint exactly what that truck driver is doing, 11.8 seconds prior to the incident. Now this concludes the heavy truck portion of the presentation. Are there any questions?
And could all the attendees please type the passcode into the Q&A for CLE credit? Our first question is, who is allowed to download the EDR data?
EDR data, as a rule of thumb, is normally owned by the chassis owner. And so if you want to download the data from a truck after an incident, you really have to go back to who owns that chassis.
Okay, and how do I know what type of engine is in a truck?
There are 2 ways to know what type of engine is in a truck, which of course will let you know if you have any data there. The first way is you give us the VIN number. We can run the VIN, and the VIN will let us know what type of engine is in there. And the second method is just if you have someone available, just have them open up the hood of the truck, and they'll be able to see if it's a Detroit diesel or a Cummins or a Volvo engine.
And is there different data for buses?
No. So now, once again, it all goes back to engine type. So if you have I've done both heavy truck and bus download. So if you have a bus with a Detroit diesel engine, you're going to get data similar to a Detroit diesel engine. You got a bus with a Cummins engine, it'll be the same. It'll be a Cummins engine. And I can tell you from experience, I've done downloads of heavy trucks, buses, garbage trucks, fire trucks, and it's always based on the type of the engine.
Okay, those are all the questions we have for now. We do have another Q&A at the end of the presentation. So those of you who did not get your question asked, I will ask that in a little bit. So thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to look at passenger vehicle event data recorders. And these are a completely different animal as to heavy trucks. So once again, an EDR for a passenger vehicle, it is an event data recorder. Now, what's different is now it's specific to the vehicle. So if you call up an engineer and you say, I have a Ford Taurus, or I have a Jeep Grand Cherokee, or I have a BMW 3 Series, or some sort of Toyota, he's able to go to a list based on what's supported, and he'll be able to tell you, are you going to expect to get accident data out of that vehicle? What's also unique to a passenger vehicle event data recorder as opposed to a heavy truck is that the ability to turn off the ability to turn off recording of data cannot be changed. So as long as you have a passenger vehicle and it hasn't been modified and it's supported, you can expect to get accident data off of that vehicle. And the criteria, the acceleration criteria must be met. So before, when we were talking, I was saying, well, for the heavy trucks, it could be the vehicle speed, which is based on the wheel speed now, not based on acceleration, or it might be a fault code. But with a passenger vehicle, they use accelerometers, and the accelerometer is looking for a change in speed of the vehicle, not necessarily looking only at the wheel speed. So it's a different system, and the purpose of it is to let the airbag to know, does the airbag need to activate or not? All right. So now, what is an event data recorder in a passenger vehicle? So the main term you're going to hear is an ACM, an airbag control module. It also may be referred to as an occupant restraint controller, an ORC, or a restraint control module, an RCM, or the airbag sensor and diagnostic module, the SDM. But generally, they all refer to the same thing, which is the airbag control module. Now, another module which can also contain EDR data on a passenger vehicle is going to be the powertrain control module. The powertrain control module, you'll see this on Fords, it's designed to help the vehicle function. So it's looking at the engine speed, it's looking at the transmission, and it can get a signal from the airbag control module to say, hey, there was an accident, and it can record about 1 minute of data. And then you'll also get what are called rollover sensors, which is looking for the vehicle to roll over in the side airbags. And what's unique is, as well as each of these individual modules can contain accident data, and you're able to access them individually. Whereas what I was discussing before on the heavy trucks, you normally need all three modules because they work together to get all the data. But in this particular case, with the ACM, PCM, and the rollover sensor, you're able to download each one individually. All right. So this is just some EDR facts for passenger vehicles. Approximately 39% of vehicles in the U.S. have an EDR with data accessible by the Bosch CDR system, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Approximately 82% of new models are supported by Bosch CDR, and approximately 11% of new models are supported by another tool. So what you need to get out of this is the newer your vehicle, the better opportunity you have to get some kind of accident data. Okay. So, EDRs for passenger vehicles, when's the information first become available? It goes back to General Motors starting in 1994, Ford and Toyota starting around the year 2001, Chrysler started in 2005, Hyundai and in 2010, and Kia, and they actually use their own separate system, and Honda in 2011. And there are a whole bunch of other models which data is also available, and if you ever need a list, I can provide you one. Okay, so now how do we get the data? There's two main systems, and there are three. You can see three different modules here. The first one, in the bottom left, there's a green box, which is the Bosch CDR. And this is the original aftermarket system, which is used by engineers and law enforcement to get data out of passenger vehicles. And as if you saw on the slide concerning the EDR Facts and how many more vehicles today have accident data, the system is becoming more and more complicated, and there are more and more tools out there. The box in the middle is the FlexRay, and that's actually an adapter to be used with the Bosch CDR, and that's to get data out of BMWs. And as well as that, then you also have on the bottom right, you have VCI. And so there's a red VCI and a blue VCI, and one is used for Kia and one is used for Hyundai. And so you're able to download data from those cars using this particular tool. The main differences in the two systems is the Bosch systems, as well as downloading a PDF. You can also get like the raw data file, which you can't change. VCI just gives you a PDF, so there has been some criticism in the industry that if someone downloads a PDF, if they weren't honest or weren't straightforward, they could potentially change the data. Whereas with the Bosch CDR system, you couldn't do that. Okay, so now how do you get the data? The preferred way, but it doesn't always happen that way because of passenger vehicles, but the preferred way is to be able to plug into what's called the OBD2. And so if anyone's ever gone to have their annual inspection for the vehicle, or to go to the mechanic and to say, hey, I have a problem with my car, it's the same plug that's underneath the dash that the mechanics use is the same things that we use. So we can hook up to that, and you can see here, this is the download I just completed a few weeks ago. And you can see I have my green Bosch CDR box there, and that's actually hooked up to the OBD2, which is underneath the dash, and have my computer. And I'm able to download the data. Now, the other option is if you have a vehicle which has been, severely damaged, the electrical system is not working, you can do what's called a bench download. And so each manufacturer has harnesses which are available. And so in this particular case, it looks like it's going into a PCM. And it's the box going directly to the PCM, and there's like a little red plug at the end there. That's the harness, which is specific it's from Bosch, but it's specific to this particular module. So you're able to do a Bosch download, a bench download, or an add download to OBD2. What's also unique is since it's just accident data, you can see that there's not a whole bunch of wires on the bench download on the right. So you don't have to worry about kind of generating any fault codes. All right. So now, what kind of events does an airbag control module record? And so there are two main types. One is going to be a non-deployment, and one is a deployment event. And so a non-deployment is an acceleration observed along one of the car's axes sufficient to cause the control module or crash sensing algorithm to enable. But it's not sufficient to warrant a command deployment. And so what that means is, someone's driving down the road, they slam their brakes, and it's just enough for the vehicle to say, you know what, I think we're about to have an accident. But of course nothing comes. They don't hit anything. So then it says, you know what, there was no accident. We don't need to deploy the airbags. If that happens, it's possible that it will record data. And so you can also get this with, if a passenger vehicle strikes a pedestrian or hits a curb, it's possible to get data even though the airbag didn't go off. So if you have a case and there was at least some change in speed, and normally there is if an accident's involved, but the airbag didn't go off, there's still a chance you have accident data there. And of course, what's the deployment? The acceleration observed along one of the car's axes is sufficient to cause the control module's crash sensing algorithm to enable, and which is sufficient to warrant a command deployment. So this is it's a fancy way of saying the airbag went off. And so in this particular case, a person's driving down the road. Let's say they hit their brakes. The system wakes up and says, oh, my goodness, I think there's about to be an impact. And they actually hit something, and they deaccelerate even quicker. They're saying, okay, we're involved in an accident. The airbag's going to go off, and it'll throw the airbag out, or it'll activate the airbag. And, of course, that's how the system will work. So these are the two types of, in these two types of events, we get data out of a passenger vehicle, EDR. All right. So a non-deployment event. What's unique about a non-deployment, remember this is where the airbag didn't go off. It normally will only store one event. It cannot be overwritten, or sorry, it can be overwritten by deployment event. That's a mistype on the slide. It can be overwritten by deployment event. It is erased after 250 ignition cycles, and it is not overwritten if it precedes a non-deployment event by less than 5 seconds. So if you have a non-deployment event and the vehicle is continuing to be used for the next few months, there's a chance that data can get written over. A deployment event is locked and stored, and so if the airbag goes off, there's a really good chance that the ACM, the airbag control module, has recorded the event and it's been stored. There's a chance if you had a power failure, so you have a really bad accident, the battery is in the front of the vehicle, if it loses power, there's a chance the data is not there. But if the airbags go off and it's supported, you really want to look into what data is available. And it cannot be overwritten. So if remember earlier I was saying, it's very easy on some of the heavy trucks to erase the data. You cannot erase the data on a EDR for a passenger vehicle because it has been locked, at least for an airbag control module because it has been locked. And normally an EDR must be replaced after deployment. So, once the airbag control module goes off, you are supposed to change the module. And not only will it capture the accident, it can also give you what's called pre-crash data. And you can also get pre-crash data with a non-deployment event as well. So what gets recorded? Pre-crash data, you're going to get the vehicle speed, steering wheel position, the percent throttle, the engine RPM, the brake switch status, the seatbelt use, was the seatbelt on or off, and it will give you the system parameters. So how was the system set up? And then kind of post-crash data, it's going to give you the impulse. So we can use that to determine how we're doing with, we can use that to determine like the forces which would have been experienced in the accident. All right. So an example of pre-crash data for an EDR, you can see here, this is just a screenshot. It gives you the vehicle speed. So you can see 2.5 seconds to 72 miles an hour, and you can see about half a second it goes to 48 miles an hour. As well as that, you get engine speed, percent throttle. You can see in the first screenshot at the top, you can see that there's a brake switch circuit status. And you can see at -2 seconds, the brakes were applied. And with the brakes being applied, the vehicle speed went down. Pre-crash data, you can also see was the cruise control on, and what's the engine torque, and what's the cruise control set. So this what I'm showing you now is just a few examples, but it will be different depending on the make and model of the vehicle. Now, how do you know if the download that you're doing, especially if it's a non-deployment, is from your event? You can see here I have 3 red arrows. The first red arrow is ignition cycles at investigation. So the way these systems work is they'll actually record how many times the ignition switch has been turned on, and it uses that to document kind of the life or the timeline of the airbag control module with the life of the vehicle. And you see the first red arrow indicates ignition cycles at the investigation is going to be 10,913, and you can see the second red arrow is ignition cycles at event is 10,913. So what we know is the vehicle has not been downloaded since the last event, and so I'm able to tie this event into the accident. You can also see it'll let you know if the driver and passenger had their seatbelt buckled. Now this is the actual impulse, and so this you can see this is telling you like how much force was observed in the accident. You can use it to calculate say force observed in the accident. And you can see the vehicle would have deaccelerated about 27 miles per hour just during the impulse. And this is over a period of maybe about 170 milliseconds. So this is a little bit of data, but you can use this to accurately calculate the change in vehicle speeds during an impact. And this is another example of an impulse. And this table is actually showing you the acceleration, which is the red lines. And that's what everything is really what's really being recorded, and then it's using formulas to determine what the changing vehicle speed is, which is going to be the blue line. And this is a great example of which came off a Dodge vehicle, which is going to be EDR data pre-crash. And so you can see in this particular case, you've got about maybe 5 seconds of pre-crash data. And it's going to, this one actually what it shows you is when the brakes were applied, the vehicle speed slowed down, and the green line is going to be the vehicle speed. All right, and just a case study, passenger vehicle EDR. You can see this is a case in which we have a vehicle which has some front-end damage and some rear-end damage. And once again, really the purpose of this is just kind of showing you how the data doesn't stand by itself. You have to look at the accident. This case, the impulse maybe give you a little bit of information, but what you can see here on the vehicle speed is that 5 seconds before it's going 66 miles an hour, 4 seconds before it's 66 miles an hour, 3 seconds before they're going 60, 2 seconds before they're going 7, and 1 second before they're going 19. Now, it's not possible for a vehicle to go from 60 miles an hour down to 7 miles an hour in a second, and then go from 7 miles an hour up to 19 miles an hour in a second. And this is all before the impact. And so what this little piece of information here is telling you is something's not right. Of course, using the report with the actual field inspection, we're able to document that the vehicle had slipped and had lost control. And this is the impulse data. All right, and so a summary between the two. The big thing to take out of this, so heavy truck EDR, the data is volatile. It can be erased. Passenger vehicle, the accident data is locked. It cannot be erased. Heavy truck EDR, the storage events are based on the change in the wheel speed. So what's the wheel speed changing? On a passenger vehicle, storage event based on acceleration. So what's the impulse from the accident? Heavy truck EDR, the data available is based on engine type. Of course, passenger vehicle, data available is based on the vehicle type. Heavy truck EDR, the engine type requires proprietary software, and Mac Involver requires special vendor. Passenger vehicle, one system recovers data for most vehicles, and there are a few exceptions, right, like the VIC tool I mentioned. In both cases, this information is used as a tool with a full-blown accident reconstruction. And any other questions? This is the last question session.
And could the attendees please type the passcode into the Q&A once again? Our first question is, how long is the data retained by the recorder?
So I guess for the passenger vehicles, if you have a deployment, it's going to be recorded it'll be locked for the life of that module. If you have a non-deployment event, it'll be 250 ignition cycles generally. And then, of course, if you have a heavy truck, that can get written over by another event, so you can't really put a time on it.
Okay, the next question is, if you know the make, model, and year of a vehicle, can you look at the raw data printout to determine preliminary analysis without having it run through your software?
Well, if you look at the raw data, I guess you look at the report, I mean, it gives you an idea, right? I mean, it tells you something, but it's difficult to, how about this? The more information you have, the better it is or the easier it is to conclude or maybe to derive an opinion. So it's possible. It just depends on how, I guess, what is the quality of that data.
Okay, and does the data remain in the EDR once downloaded? In other words, can the data be accessed more than once?
Yes, the data can be accessed more than once. Passenger vehicles, it goes back, it's locked. If it's a non-deployment, it'll stay in there as long as you don't have the 250, ignition cycles or there's not an acceleration. But on the heavy truck stuff, it's possible to lose that data. So whoever's doing the downloads, you want to make sure they kind of know what they're doing.
Okay, the next question is, what is the average cost for obtaining a data download on low-damaged vehicle?
So average cost on a data download, I missed the end of the question.
What is the average cost for obtaining a data download on a low-damage vehicle?
On a low damage vehicle, so it's really just going to be the time to have the engineer go out there and come back. And so it's just really, I mean, as long as there's not that much damage and you can hook up pretty easily, it's just going to be the time to get the engineer out there, do the download and get back. And so if it's within, 5 miles of the office, it's only 5 miles of time. But of course, if it's halfway across the U.S., then it can be a bit more expensive.
Okay, this is going to be our last question. Excuse me, we do have some additional questions, so we will send them over to you, James, to get answers for everyone. So the last question is the data susceptible to manipulation?
As long as you're working with the raw data files, no. But if you're only working with a PDF, then it could be. So if you're getting for instance, on the passenger vehicle CDR, if you're getting that raw CDR file, it would be impossible to manipulate that. And the same thing goes with the heavy vehicle truck. If you're getting the raw file, you can't manipulate that. But if someone's only giving you a PDF, like with the Hyundai or the Kia VCI, then there's always a risk, someone might do that. I've never seen that happen, but I guess there's always a chance.
Okay, thank you for answering those questions for us. In addition to being your best source for testifying and consulting experts, TASA also offers e-discovery and forensic solutions, free interactive webinars, cybersecurity, and research reports on expert witnesses such as the Challenge History Report 2.0, the Professional Sanction Search, and the Expert Profile 360. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and especially James Whelan for his time and effort in creating this presentation. If you would like to speak with Mr. Whelan, or if you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding an expert witness for a case that you are working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. Thank you all again for attending, and have a great day, everyone. This concludes our program for today.